So you and I had a disagreement, one of our largest ones in our position rankings. We're almost done with yet. We're still going to do point guard rankings this week. I think I had Miles Bridges in the high teens. You had him, I want to say, 30th. And part of that was I felt that his defense had gotten better this season. And so I wanted to go back and really confirm that and lock in on it. And welcome on to a Dunc'd On 15 and 60. If it's your first time joining us, this is our attempt. We'll see how much we can make it through before we totally run out of gas, making our eyes bleed with all these stats and scouting reports to talk about all 15 teams in a given conference. Today, we are going to do the Eastern Conference, and we got a lot of interesting things to discuss. The Cleveland Cavaliers rotations, the Indiana Pacers with Ivica Zubac in the 5 games that he played before probably being done for the season. VJ Edgecombe going off for big games recently. So much to discuss among many other things. We're also going to try to talk about how good these teams are at their best, their fastball, as it were, as we go through them. And if you're watching on YouTube, a like and subscribe and a comment and tell your friends, and any of those would be very much appreciated. And probably most importantly, hit that bell so you know when a new video drops, or you can subscribe to us on your podcast player of choice and get every episode ad free, all 6 per week, by subscribing to Dunc'd On Prime. Link to that is in the show notes. Mr. Leroux, how are you doing here? Where are we starting?
I'm doing well. We can. I think it's funny because they lost at home today, but I think let's start in Boston with the Celtics.
Yeah, I saw the second half of that game, and it was disappointing, certainly with Anthony Edwards out, and a Minnesota team that is not an unbelievable defensive juggernaut to really hold them down in the second half. But despite that, the Celtics are 47 and 24, only 4 and 3 in their last 7. However, they're fourth in net rating at plus 7.9. There's 3 teams that are bunched right around that area. Second on offense, fourth on defense. They project for the 2 seed at 54 and 28 per ESPN's BPI. They will be making the playoffs. So let's talk about how good these guys are at their best. Obviously, a little bit of a difficult determination given that Jason Tatum has just returned.
Right. And so figuring it out, you kind of have to exclude Tatum just because all of the samples with him are too small to really throw in. But so what I ended up going with, and feel free to disagree, we can do some of this on the fly. What I ended up going with as the kind of the core here is Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and Neemias Queta, because Queta helps give them some of their defensive foundation. And so with those 3 gentlemen on the floor and any other 2 players, so that will include some Tatum minutes because he's played a fair amount with those guys. The Celtics have a plus 9.5 clean the glass net rating in about 2,000 possessions. And their offensive rating, 119.6, defensive rating of 110. Those are both per clean the glasses filters. Those are in the 82nd percentile on offense, 88th percentile on defense. And so when you consider that Jason Tatum, even with how he's played, could potentially make some of those lineups better, I would say, especially relative to our expectations, that is a pretty strong number, plus 9.5 for the Celtics.
Yeah, it is. And you and I, particularly me, felt like, they're going to hit a gap year this year. They're not going to make the playoffs. A big part of that, there are 2 reasons I thought that. One was that I felt that they just had really unproven depth, particularly at center and then backup wings. Jason Tatum played so many minutes for them, was such a jack of all trades on both ends of the floor. They were always at their best when he was out there. And then also, I thought that Derek White and Jaylen Brown were going to suffer some injuries at some point, and then maybe the Celtics would fall behind, and there just wouldn't really be much reason to push those guys really hard. Instead, they came out of the gates okay, and then just went on an absolute tear over 2-3 months, and they're at the point that they're at now. So pretty amazing. I think, again, this is indication of how good of a coach Joe Mazzulla is, because despite the fact that they have a totally different way of playing, largely different personnel, other than maybe 3 guys who have been stalwarts, Pritchard, Brown, and Derek White, so many of the statistical indicators are similar to where they were a year ago.
We focused a lot, justifiably so, on their offense because to lose Jason Tatum, to lose a lot of the other guys, and their 5-out identity, and still be now they're second on offense is incredible, but they're also remarkably stable on defense. And the Celtics last year finished the season fifth in defense. This year they're fourth as of this recording. And using Dean Oliver's four factors, so those are effective field goal percentage, turnover rate, rebounding, and then free throw rate. There's an offensive version and defensive version of both those. The Boston Celtics on defense are within two places in terms of their league ranking in three of the four factors defensively. The only one where their larger deviation is opponent free throw rate. They've gone from best in the league to seventh best, which is a big difference, but they're still well above half and all that. And so that is pretty striking when you think about the defensive turnover that they've had, Jason Tatum being largely unavailable this season, a lot of the other things that they've had to do. And I wanted to do a little bit of digging on how and why that is the case. And a big part of that story, you wonder about if is it shooting luck, and the answer is largely no. I'll get into a few places where that might be a little bit different, but the Celtics are by far the top team in the league in terms of opponent location effective field goal percentage, which is a stat that Clean the Glass does, which is basically if you take the shot where opponents are taking their shots and you regress it a few different ways. How does that work out? So shots around the basket, 3-pointers, especially corner threes, are more valuable. And they are a big deviation from the league average. So the league average in terms of the expected effective field goal percentage is about 55%. Celtics are 53.5%. And only one other team, the Kings, is basically even like outside of the pack. And there is an important piece of this that is sketchy, which is the Celtics, because the biggest thing that they do is that they have this insanely low opponent shots around the rim percentage, and Cleaning the Glass uses 4 feet. And the Boston Celtics, by that measure, they're still tops in the league when you do just the road stuff. And it's good that you could do these splits because we know there's home cooking in certain places. But the Celtics, they're at home, it's only scored that 20% of their opponent shots are within 4 feet. And that is impossibly low. That is lower than any other team by a mile and a half. But the Celtics are still best in the league on this same measure in road, which is not going to be cooked in the same way. So they are doing a really good job preventing teams from getting to the basket, even if the overall numbers are not quite that extreme. And then
and to break in on that, you something that you put here later, which I thought is fascinating in that regard, about preventing teams from getting to the basket. Neemias Queta and Luka Garza have been their main centers most of the year, and their numbers in terms of the shots they're actually contesting at the basket are not unbelievable, right? Queta contests a larger than average percentage of opponent shots at the basket, 37%, averages right about 30, but allows 57% shooting. That's pretty close to average. And then Garza, 33% contest, but 68% field goal allowed. But both of those guys, when they're on the floor, opponents don't really get to the rim that much. Only 25 rim attempts per 100 with Cade on the floor. That goes up to 27 with Garza. And you noted this too, that opponents really are struggling to finish in our contested finishing metric. Now, that's the way the data is parsed out. That's within 10 feet. And so what this shows me is that when opponents are getting all the way there, they're doing okay, but they don't get all the way there very often. And then they're forced into difficult floaters, which are contested. And the Celtics are third best in the league on opponents contested finishing. And so the Thunder are 49%, Pistons 51. Those are the two best rim protecting teams in the league. And they have great rim protectors. The Celtics do it more just with their team defense. They're at 51.8%. So that, I think, is the key to their defense. What else stands out then about their statistical profile on defense?
Defense, in many ways, is about choices and sacrifices. And so the Celtics are choosing to focus a lot of their attention defensively on stopping things around the basket. And there are benefits to that. Typically, that will make you better in terms of maybe lowering your foul rate and potentially, depending on positioning, help you with defensive rebounding. And depending on a couple things, and the Celtics are historically a low turnover forcing team. The last 4 years, they've been in the bottom 10 in the league in terms of forcing turnovers. But it gets you those benefits. But then you have the trade-offs. I brought up turnovers. Another one is you're going to have to give up shots from somewhere. And so one of them that you could think of is, oh, they suck in, a team could suck in from the corners and you give up a ton of corner threes. The Celtics do not give up a ton of corner threes, and that is not something that you can game. That is not a positioning of the floor. It's just where the shots are. But they're giving up the seventh lowest percentage of opponent shots as corner threes. But instead, what they are giving up is arc threes. So the Celtics are giving up almost 1/3 of opponent shots are 3-pointers from the arc, so not the corner threes. And that's over 4% higher as the total proportion of team shots above the league average and 1.4% above anyone else. So the Celtics are giving up a lot more of these threes. And then they're also giving up, and this is something that you and I generally think of as a calibrator for good defenses, they're also giving up the third highest long two rate. And so I brought up the nuances in terms of the shots right around the basket because that's a 4 foot versus 5 foot and where they're delineated. Long twos, there's generally not much variance. So the Celtics, what they're giving up more than most teams, so they're giving up way fewer shots around the rim, even if there's this fudging. But they're also giving up, so what they're sacrificing is long twos, which are generally the lowest efficiency shots in the game. And then they're also giving up arc threes, and arc threes are generally less productive than corner threes. And so I was looking at all that stuff, and it's really interesting. So that's the stuff they're giving up, and so you could think about it from a basic perspective that all sounds good. And the other part of this is there have been all these years that our Seth Partnow has talked about this is the Jedi mind trick three point shooting, and under Ime Udoka in particular, like there were these years where the Celtics gave up insanely low 3-point shooting, and there may be something in that. But the Celtics they're not actually unduly good at forcing opponents to miss threes to the extent that can be forced. The opponents they're giving up a ton of threes. They're eighth highest opponents in terms of percentage on those arc threes. And overall, the Celtics are giving up about the league average. So it isn't a case of, oh, this is a fluky thing, focusing on that outlier and stuff. Instead, it does seem to be more about controlling what they can control or just choosing to sacrifice something that opponents generally have trouble making.
All right, I think we can move to the Charlotte Hornets.
Woof. The Hornets now 37-34 on the heels of a 5-2 stretch in their last 7. The Charlotte Hornets are top 10 in cleaning the glass net rating plus 4.3. They're 9th, 5th on offense, 14th on defense, which is another achievement for Charles Lee and this coaching staff. The Hornets are projected to finish with 44 wins, which would be the 8th seed per BPI in the Eastern Conference.
So you and I had a disagreement. One of our largest ones in our position rankings, we're almost done with yet. We're still going to do point guard rankings this week. I think I had Mikal Bridges in the high teens. You had him, I want to say, 30th. And part of that was I felt that his defense had gotten better this season. And so I wanted to go back and really confirm that and lock in on it. And you were right. I should have ranked him lower. He is not as I really just kind of let that Charlotte patina rub off on him. And well, I do think he provides something at power forward that on the offensive end that maybe they need, perhaps less so now with Kobe White, frankly, but before they did, as a fourth guy who could pass a little bit, attack off the dribble, hit a few shots, maybe even handle in transition some, give him some isolation play against a smaller player. But defensively, the film just was not that great. And I felt I'd been focused on him moving his feet a little bit better. And simply the fact that he was the number one defender a lot of the time on what had been a pretty decent defense the last few months. But as I really locked in on the film of him over the last few games, just didn't get what you need to get from that power forward position. And I feel they do need to upgrade there defensively to really take the next step. So first off, he just doesn't really provide much playmaking. 0.7 steals, 0.5 blocks per 36. There were points earlier in his career where he was at around 1 block per 36, but with the waning of his overall athleticism, that's gone down. And as I looked at him, his athleticism, it's not quick twitch, and he also doesn't have a ton of length. And so he can get up for a block every once in a while or a contest, but he's got to really take 2 steps before he can jump. When he's on the ball, he can't really get up off the ground much. And then he also, as I mentioned, doesn't have great length. So the physical characteristics, I think moving his feet, he's all right. And he does have a strong chest. So if you can kind of get a chest on a guy who's maybe a little bit slower, kind of more his size, he can bounce him a little bit as that guy tries to go right through him. Like he is going to at least provide resistance in that vein. But where he's really struggling, I would say, is in two areas. The first is as a switch defender, he's just late. Like it's like they're switching, his guy sets a screen, and he always finds a way to just like not quite be in a stance, just not quite get there in time. And that's a huge problem given his physical characteristics because the way that he plays a lot of times, both in being late, stepping up on some of these switches, even against good shooters, but also even in one-on-one defense, is that he kind of lays off a little bit. And he's not that intense and he doesn't get into the ball and he doesn't really have great hands, but he also doesn't have great length. So he plays like guys like he's Tayshaun Prince or something, but he just doesn't really impact the shot that much when guys will shoot jumpers over him in isolation. Or again, when he's trying to switch out, guys will just pull a three before he gets there. Or he'll be late and they can blow right by him. And then he doesn't have the length to impact them as he's running alongside or from behind. Then the other thing that really stood out to me was that even kind of smaller guards who have some athleticism, but if he switches onto a guy, but again, he's probably maybe a little bit late, that guy can get in the lane. Maybe he'll recover, but then a guard even can just rise up right over him and he's not able to deal with. Like Tyler Hero had one play getting to the dotted line where he just jumped over Dylan Brooks, or sorry, not Dylan Brooks. I wish you were Dylan Brooks. Miles Bridges. And that was troubling because most power forwards stop that play. Most power forwards, Tyler Hero isn't even willing to shoot over them, right? They're just too big, too long. Tyler Hero has to figure out something else out. Same thing with De'Aaron Fox. Very similar play. Gets going. And it's not even like Hero was going so fast and then he just stopped on a dime and rose up. He sort of just meandered. Bridges looked like he was in position. And if he just had more length or more size, he would just have been able to deter the shot or block it. And so Fox, again, was able to just kind of go right over him, really just right in his face. And Miles Bridges couldn't do much about it. Also loses his man a fair amount. There's one play where he's guarding Simone Fontecchio in the corner. There's a drive on the other side of the floor. It doesn't really even penetrate the lane. Fontecchio shakes up out of the corner right to the arc, and the pass goes to Fontecchio, and Miles Bridges just starts running towards the corner like Fontecchio is still there because he wasn't seeing both ball. And man, that was something that happened a fair amount as well. So most of what they're doing is switching. He's switching out on the perimeter a lot, but his contest percentage is pretty low, 12% of opponent shots, and they shoot 66% at the rim. So that's well below average. Most power forwards contest in the high teens and allow a little bit worse shooting than that. Like I said, if he gets a step or two, he can get up and maybe bother a guy a little bit, but most guys don't really feel him around the basket if he's coming over to contest. And he's not early on these plays where he could use that barrel chest. So ultimately, there really just wasn't a lot that he was providing. I thought the most hilarious thing was one of his best closeouts that I saw was actually on Stephon Castle, who you are kind of wanting to leave open above the arc, although he's hitting a few more lately. So he's just kind of out there. It's not a high activity level. And I mentioned Dylan Brooks because I would say they have relatively similar physical characteristics. Maybe even Miles Bridges is certainly a better leaper in space and probably even in short areas, even though neither of them are great there. But Dylan Brooks just has a different mentality. He wasn't a high draft pick. He gets into guys. He's really intense. He's willing to commit a foul now and then. You try to back him down in the post. He's just not going to let you do it. He's going to make every catch difficult. He's going to get into guys. And if Miles Bridges had that sort of a mentality, he could possibly be effective, but he just doesn't. He's just late. He's laying back and acting like he's 4 inches taller than he is, and he can't afford to play that way with his physical characteristics. So, yeah, I think really, I'm back to thinking, especially because they've got good cheap production out of the center position. Bridges is going into the last year of his deal. Next year, he can be matching salary. Charlotte has some options in the kitty. I wouldn't mind Bridges more as a six man, but he's a little bit expensive for that as well. So they just need to get someone who can be more of an impact player defensively, especially because in their starting lineup, and if they could re-sign Kobe White, like they'll have enough ball handling. If that guy is kind of more of a spot up shooter and just makes plays defensively and can be a number one defensively, that they're probably fine. I don't think their offense will take a big step back without Bridges' ball handling at this point. So, yeah, you were right. I was wrong. I admit it. I should move him down in my power forward rankings.
The game that stuck out to me with this was that Cooper Flag 49-point performance, one of the more fun games of this year against the
Yeah,
Hornets, that they weren't putting Bridges on Flag that much. It wasn't, Jason Kidd's doing this masterful stuff to get Miles Bridges off of Cooper Flag. No, they were going with Nipple. They were going with all these other things, and Bridges played 38 minutes in that game. So it wasn't a circumstance of he was in foul trouble or something else. He was out there. It just didn't really have it. And you mentioned this a little bit, and we'll get into this in the offseason preview, which potentially is a long time from now for the Hornets, that they do have these resources to bring to bear if they really want to prioritize this, because they could use Bridges and then the very loose salary matching rules for this type of team to get something. They also have draft picks they could throw into the mix. They could do a lot of things here. And as you mentioned, the low cost at the center spot. They have Kalkbrenner's under team control for another 3 years after this year. Diabate is only 1, but they could maneuver things in a couple different ways. They could make this happen. And they're eventually going to have to pay Brendan Miller, but the Nipples raise, that isn't until 2029. So if they want to, the Hornets can throw a lot into this, and I think they would be wise to do it. And one thing, just briefly, we'll talk about this in offseason preview, is I might actually like, if they can do it logistically, getting 2 bites at the defensive specialist apple. One that's more of a wing power forward who's the starter, and then somebody who's really good on ball, that type of player for when you need that. It seems like they like Josh Green, but I would like to have another guy who maybe aligns more with where they're going overall.
yeah.
And
Again, just a little more size. I mean, and they took that swing with Tijan Salon, and he's not that level of player either in terms of his feel or athleticism defending around the basket or his foot speed. He does have a 9.2 standing reach, though. I don't know if you knew about that, but yeah, I mean, they got like Josh Green is probably a little bit too limited offensively and too small. I don't think he has quite like the length or intensity. Grant Williams can kind of give you, I think he's having a solid enough return from injury. So he can give you like some bumping in the post and at least spread the floor a little bit, set some screens. So they can kind of cobble it together. Like Sion James could do a few things as well, but they don't really have that elite length athlete who can at least make a few shots. So that's the guy they got to find. Maybe they got to trade for him, but of course the whole league's looking for that guy.
I think we can go from one disappointing Bridges to another and do the Knicks next.
Yeah, he has been struggling of late. The Knicks, they're always up and down. It seems some guys are playing well, some guys aren't, but they're overall trucking along pretty well here. They're 47-25. They're 6-1 in their last 7. 5th in net rating, plus 6.7. They're 3rd on offense, 9th on defense. They project to win 53 games, pretty much right where they've been the last few years. That would be the 3rd seed. So that's only one behind Boston at this point in time. Boston losing to Minnesota definitely hurt them, I think, today. So before we start talking about Mikal Bridges, let's talk just about how the Knicks have been at their best.
I decided that was to look at the splits with Brunson, Bridges, Towns, and Anunoby all on the floor, because that still gives you a lot of potential fifths. And so overall, when those 4 guys are on the floor, plus 4.4 net rating in 1,620 possessions. That was before their dismantling of the dismantled Washington Wizards. And the most successful fifth is actually Mitchell Robinson, the Knicks, plus 10.1 net rating in just 101 possessions, with him as the fifth. Second most successful net rating wise is Deuce McBride, plus 4.8, and then the most common has been Josh Hart, plus 2.6 in 869 possessions. And remarkably, in part because those guys have been pretty durable, the New York Knicks over this season have tried 11 different players as the fifth with those 4. of that quartet, and I'm not going to run through all of them, but they've had 11 different guys. Most successful, Mitchell Robinson, Deuce McBride, and then Josh Hart.
Well, there's been some talk, perhaps, that Mikal Bridges should be taken out of the starting lineup, and that Josh Hart, who's quietly shooting 40% from three this season, that he should be the one to remain in the starting lineup. And then, I'm not sure who the replacement would be. McBride is really good. I know Jerry Engelman really likes him, but he's still out with this core muscle injury. Mitchell Robinson, I could see Mitchell Robinson starting some games in the playoffs, but I don't think during the regular season that's going to make a ton of sense. So I don't just who that fifth guy is going to be if you're going to take out either Hart or Bridges is a tough decision. But Bridges has surely struggled lately. He's played every game, of course, since the All-Star break, but he's only scored over 20 points one time. He had 25 in the really nice win over the San Antonio Spurs. So he's averaging 10.4 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal, 0.9 blocks, but only 30 minutes per game, which is pretty low for a guy. You remember his first year, he had this tete-a-tete with Tom Thibodeau about how he was being played too many minutes. And now I think he certainly is going to start. It would be a weird disaster if, just starting this extension, Mr. 5 first-round picks gets taken out of the starting lineup. I think Mike Brown just doesn't want that smoke right now until his hand is absolutely forced in that regard. But he just is Mike Brown, and this is again with McBride, one of his most logical replacements, not even available. Mike Brown has slowly been going away from him. What are some of the other numbers that have indicated his struggles?
There's some pretty severe drop offs. So I use the All-Star break as the delineation. And so before the break, Mikal Bridges was shooting 39% on about 6 threes per 36. Now, 31% on 5 per 36. That's a small enough
Yeah,
sample. You don't like that's way worse, but it's a small enough sample
yeah,
that
yeah,
you don't want to bring too much in. But Bridges also, and he doesn't do as many of these. Mikal Bridges was 59% on twos before the break and is now converting just 47% of his twos. And he's never been a big free throw guy, but his free throw attempt rate has gone down significantly. And so that's also an indication potentially of decreased aggressiveness and everything else. And then I looked at his synergy splits in terms of play type for these two time windows. And what was fascinating, there were two things that were fascinating. So one of them is that a lot of the overall play types are pretty similar one to one. Spot ups, pretty much the same proportion. Transition, actually a little bit higher, which can sometimes indicate a player has a smaller role within the offense. And the one that does drop off is about 9% of Mikal Bridges' pick and possessions were pick and roll ball handler before the break. That is now down to 5%. So that's roughly halved in this time. And that also coincides, we've talked about this previously, with him having a diminished role within the offense. So that's one part of the story, is that's this shift into a lower usage play type. And you can see it with the other stuff. That's not the thing that piqued my interest. The thing that piqued my interest, and again, we're dealing with smaller samples here. Mikal Bridges has only had 49 transition possessions during this window. He converted 64% with field goal percentage in transition before the swoon, and it's 42% now. That is a massive, massive drop off in terms of his effectiveness, and for a guy who doesn't do that much in the offense right now, that is a pretty big thing. And so that led me to a question, which I tried to answer a little bit, which is it possible that he's dealing with an injury? And I forgot to ask this person for permission to use their name. So I'll say I asked somebody who I thought might know this, and they said they hadn't heard anything. And so here's the reason. In most circumstances, with a guy who's playing, I wouldn't speculate like this. But Mikal Bridges is the anomaly for the reason of this game played streak. And so Mikal Bridges, just his ridiculous longevity, including playing 83 games that year where he got traded. He's played in every single game his whole career, I believe, and definitely every game in the last few years, because COVID, there was the weird COVID year. And Mikal Bridges, he clearly values that, where there these other memorable games were basically just briefly dipped in and everything else. is that in almost every other circumstance of any other player in the league, I would say, of course, they're not playing through something to this degree because it doesn't necessarily benefit the team or anything else. For Mikal Bridges, I'm at least willing to entertain the possibility that he's playing through something that other guys potentially would not, that we haven't had it disclosed because he values this streak enough and wants to just play through it.
Yeah, I think transition, the effort level, guys could just wear down. He's getting older as well.
Mhm.
So, I mean, now maybe he could be. That's the other thing is like you think, oh, he's playing fewer minutes. Maybe he could be more effective in some of these effort plays, but that hasn't necessarily been the case. So it's going to be like the Knicks did make it to the conference finals last year, but I think you would have to say that that trade probably has not worked. Well, unless they got Jalen Brunson to extend at a below market extension, right? I guess that, like, that's probably part of it as well. But yeah, I mean, again, hard to say the sky's falling for the Knicks, right? They're 47-25. Like they're going to be probably almost certainly a top three seed unless something crazy goes wrong from an injury standpoint. And they have a lot of talent, and at least Karl-Anthony Towns is playing a little bit better now, but maybe not up in the usage, but he's been more efficient. Let's talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're rivals, but now 3 games behind them in the win column, 2.5 overall. Where do the Cavs stand right now? And then let's talk about how Kenny Atkinson should be setting this team up rotation wise in the playoffs.
The Cavs are 44-27 on the season, strong 5-2 in their last 7. They're 8th overall in net rating, plus 4.3, 7th on offense, 12th on defense, and projected to win 52 games, which would be the 4 seed in the East. And they are going to make the playoffs. And the question about the Cavs fastball gets into part of it is just, will they have Jared Allen available? How much will they have Jared Allen available? Because it's a very small sample, but because they changed one of their lead guards. But so Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen, they've only played 76 possessions together. Oh, a plus 36.7 net rating. But that's only 76 possessions. 125 offensive rating, 88.3. 88.3, ridiculous. You wouldn't expect to see that persist over any real sample, even if you're the best defense in the world. You take out Jared Allen because they've just played a lot more possessions without Jared Allen. Mitchell plus Harden plus Mobley, plus 7.1 net rating in 338 possessions, and still really strong on offense, 123.4, 116.3 defensive rating. And that group has been, that 116.3, that's still pretty good. That's still, it's a worse defensive rating than the Cavs have for the full season. And that group is actually unlucky in terms of opponent shooting. 37.3% is better than most teams do. But it is a concern that those groups, they're not doing the big man stuff well. They're fouling a ton, 3rd percentile in terms of opponent free throw attempt rate, and they're giving up 70% conversion at the rim.
Yeah, and I think that fouling a ton makes sense because you just have Mobley and then who's your, I mean, Harden has been playing the 4. So Dean Wade has been in and out of the lineup. He's not necessarily going to play that much. So maybe it'll be Sam Merrill. Maybe it'll be Jalen Tyson. Max Strus just came back. Keon Ellis is going to play a lot. Like he'll create some events on defense. But largely, Evan Mobley is awesome at not fouling personally. That's why he can play so many minutes. But they're getting overwhelmed physically by other players who are able to just go right through someone like Keon. I mean, we saw that in that Celtic game, to be sure. And so that's why that's been always a big hallmark of Kenny Atkinson. His defenses are usually these control what you can control defenses. We're going to stay in front of guys with switching. We're not going to make mistakes, and we're going to just make you shoot over us and not foul, but and then get the rebound. But unfortunately, the rebounding is not that great with Mobley at center. Definitely better than it has been at times. But then there really are too small, and they only have one rim defender. If he gets switched out on the perimeter, then they're able to get to the basket, shoot that high percentage, or get fouled. So let's assume that Jared Allen is going to come back. Now, it was this knee injury seems to be getting worse and worse in the designations that it's receiving. First, it was a bumped knee, then it was a minor issue that they didn't say what it was. Then it was, oh, it's actually knee tendonitis. Then I don't think that's changed in the injury report, but Chris Fedor characterized it as severe tendonitis in the last week or so. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I think Jared Allen, we haven't had a report of him ramping up his activity necessarily. And the Cavs are going to be conservative with injuries, but I do think they need him. We're going to assume that he's going to be back in the playoffs. So Mitchell, Harden, Mobley, Allen, that clearly is your four starters. Who is your fifth starter if you're Kenny Atkinson?
There are a number of candidates, which is one of the things I was really high on for the Cavs, largely incorrectly before the season. And one of those guys was somebody who is in this conversation pretty high in it for me. Wasn't my thought in the beginning. That's Jalen Tyson. And the reason why I want to start with Jalen Tyson is because you think about the deficiencies of the other four guys, and they're lots of talented offensive players, but you don't really have that on ball chaos producer. And to me, Jalen Tyson is the best player of their available options who makes fewer sacrifices other places. Keon Ellis may be the single best player at that specific thing, but not as good as Jalen Tyson at the rest of the game. And so to me, especially on the idea that the Cavs probably doing this as an offensive team that's good enough defensively, that you don't want to make the sacrifices that Keon Ellis brings. So Tyson, I think of him as the most compelling option in terms of making the opponent work on when they're on defense, but then also trying to negate some of their strengths for the opponent when they're on offense.
Yeah, it's a difficult call. It seems like Max Strus has come back and he immediately has reclaimed essentially his old role. I know he started coming off the bench, but and Sam Merrill also has played some three for them. And both those guys are tough defenders, but they will have to play the role of guarding the other team's best perimeter threat. You know, maybe if it's Jared Allen and Mobley together, that could be Mobley if it's a bigger guy. But yeah, let's say you're going up against the Celtics. Well, then you're going to put Sam Merrill on either Jason Tatum or Jalen Brown. So Jalen Tyson, I think, just doesn't have that trust level from Kenny Atkinson. And also, he was pretty bad, I thought, in that Celtics game. He's probably been better against smaller players as well. So perhaps if you're going up against, I don't know, the Knicks, like you try to start with him on Jalen Brunson. And, you know, he is going to make open shots, but he's not the movement shooter that Strus or Sam Merrill are. And maybe Kenny Atkinson say, well, you know, is Jalen Tyson like really that much better than Sam Merrill or Max Strus, especially if we're just going to be switching anyway, especially if we have two bigs out there, then maybe that movement shooting, because Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, like they're not really going to move much off the ball. And then Evan Mobley's shooting is dried up. So maybe you need an elite shooter if you're going to play both of those guys, which, you know, that makes sense to me. Dean Wade is probably the worst offensive player of all these guys, but that would be an all defense group that they could possibly go to. And you're switching 3 through 5, actually, really four. You're probably switching everything actually with Harden. But yeah, I think like Tyson on paper is kind of more of a 3 and D guy, but I think Kenny really has a concern level with the two bigs. And you go back to when he was with France and they took off as soon as they benched Rudy Gobert and just played Victor at center and played Gershon Yabusele with him. And he clearly, unlike JB Bickerstaff, believes in having enough shooting on the floor. I think their defense will never be good enough without those two bigs. So maybe you just have to go Merrill or Strus, and you just Jalen Tyson will fit in where he fits in.
I hadn't really fully thought about it until you brought it up, but something remarkable about the top of the East, really the whole East playoff picture, is how not guard dominant these teams are in terms of how they want to succeed. So the Pistons have Cade Cunningham, who you can defend a little bit differently due to his size. The Celtics are forward centric in a way that most teams aren't. The Knicks are the exception in this case, but more the historical norm. The Raptors don't rely as much on their point guard as a kind of stereotypical team. The Hawks run through a lot of things through a point forward. And then the Sixers might be more of that with Maxey, but the Sixers are exceedingly unlikely to be on the same side of the bracket as the Cavs because the Cavs are looking like the 4 or the 3, and so they're not going to play them in the first round. Let's put it that way. And then even the Magic and Heat aren't really that team. So if you get down to the Hornets, but the Hornets method of attack is different too. The Hornets Cavs series, by the way, it's not going to happen in all likelihood, but that would be fascinating due to I brought this up previously because of the relative strengths and theories of their teams. But I hadn't thought about it as cohesively as I am right now. That the matchups I was thinking of Tyson more for that, even not heliocentric, but that point guard centric offense. And the Knicks are really the only team they're likely to play that plays that style.
So I guess the other question I wanted to ask, and I was talking about what you were saying there. The other question I wanted to ask is, what about on the backup unit? Because you still have really, they probably would prefer not to play Thomas Bryant at all. They probably would prefer not to play Craig Porter at all. He's injured right now. So that leaves you Schroeder, Keon Ellis, Tyson, and one of Strus or Merrill, assuming one of the other of those guys starts. So that's pretty small coming off the bench there. I mean, you basically have a slightly undersized small forward in Tyson, and then 2 point guard size guys, Ellis and Schroeder, and then shooting guard size guy, even though he has some toughness. And yeah, you can intersperse those guys in with Mobley and Allen. You keep one of them on the floor at all times. And I guess Dean Wade too would be the other one there. So that's he would be the guy who gives you a little bit more size, and hopefully you can get away with playing him at the 4 because you have other offensive options. Would you consider just not playing Schroeder at all? I mean, I think he'll start playing, but or maybe it's just got to be one of Schroeder or Ellis.
I think that in most circumstances, you're going to want Harden or Mitchell on the floor at all times. And if that's the case, then you don't really need Schroeder as much. In specific circumstances, maybe teams are going to some aggressive doubles and you don't think you can get all of that to work. Maybe you have him as a change of pace and everything else. But I think that you try to minimize him. And then to me, Wade's most important role is to be the 4 when they can't play both, when Mobley and Allen are not on the 4. So he's either the 4 next to Allen or the 4 next to Mobley at the 5. That enables you ideally to minimize Thomas Bryant, to minimize, Larry Nance hasn't even been well enough to been played well enough to be minimized. And so Wade, to me, he's the best of those players. And so you use him to fill those gaps primarily. And if you happen to get enough of Allen and Mobley together to play Dean Wade more, well, that's a luxury that you're happy to have. But that is the primary role for Wade. So for me, minimal Schroeder, Wade in that specific role. And I like Dean Wade a lot, but that's the thing he's best at.
Yeah, I think the issue there is getting enough ball handling when Donovan Mitchell is playing without James Harden. So I certainly would limit Schroeder to only those circumstances. But then, of course, you're pretty small as well. And then where does Ellis fit in? Maybe the idea is Ellis can play with Harden. He'll guard point guards in those circumstances and no Mitchell. And then Schroeder can play with Mitchell because we saw the way Mitchell wore down as the only point guard last year against Indiana. Now, I don't think, other than Detroit, you're probably not going to face a team among the other top teams that's going to provide that level of pressure. Maybe Boston with some of their backup wings, but probably not their starting units. But it's a really interesting question for Kenny Atkinson to answer, and we'll have to see who their first round opponent ends up being as well. I think Orlando is another team that has been a tough matchup for the Cavs. If they have Anthony Black and Jalen Suggs healthy, that may require Schroeder to be out there more. But then Orlando is pretty big, and so maybe he gets beat up in that regard, and they're going to try to get Paolo Banchero switched onto a guard and let him attack. We'll talk more about Paolo a little bit later, but why don't you direct us to our next team?
One other use case for Keon
Okay.
Ellis is
All right, yeah.
that in those circumstances where there aren't that many of these teams in the East either, remarkably, where a bench unit is more reliant on a single smaller player, to have Ellis out there to slow that down. Maybe you want to deviate a little bit from your switching scheme in a circumstance like that. I'm thinking of something like the Pacers aren't going to make the playoffs, but something like what TJ McConnell did at times for the Pacers last year.
Mm.
In that kind of a circumstance, there could be a real use of Ellis where you deviate from your normal defense philosophy. But I just brought up the teams in the East. They don't even really have that for the second unit, a lot of these teams. It's such an unusual circumstance that you just don't have these point guard dominated starting lineups or second units. But maybe you put him on Peyton Pritchard in a theoretical Celtics series, and you use that.
I
for
actually
LSU.
don't like that matchup. I think Peyton Pritchard's going right
Too
through
strong.
him. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's too strong. I think you need more length. And maybe that's Tyson. Like I think Tyson is probably a better on-ball defender of small guards than Ellis. Ellis creates events and gets out in transition. Like that's kind of more. He's just too thin to me to get over screens particularly well. Yeah. So I mean, if they were ever to go up against Philly, which seems pretty unlikely at this point, Tyrese Maxey would be that sort of player.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, other than that, I don't really see that. I mean, how many teams are led by small guards at this point offensively, particularly good teams? I mean, the LA Clippers, Darius Garland used to be that guy. Donovan Mitchell, he's on Cleveland right now. But yeah, I mean, there really are not that many teams that are led by like a 6'3" and under guard. Golden State, and there's probably of teams that are gonna be in the play-in mix. There's like two or three of those guys, and obviously Brunson is the other one. So, but Brunson, even so, he's not beating you with quickness. Again, you want to have more length on him, and it's just become more of a power game in general because of the way that the game is called. I don't think it's a coincidence now that big burly guys like Jalen Brunson is going to knock you backward, get to a spot, use his off arm. He can draw contact and fouls, whereas someone like John Morant, who's still a good player, Trae Young, like these guys, they use quickness, and then if you got a hand on him, it was a foul. That's not the case anymore. So it's a different league for sure. Where we go next?
Toronto, the team currently projected to face the Cavs in the first round.
Yeah. Manuel quickly might be someone to guard at least a little bit, but he's not necessarily their number one pick and roll threat. Toronto righted the ship a little bit with some help from a somewhat easier schedule. 39 and 30, 3-3 in their last six. They're plus 2.4 net ratings, 12th in the league, 14th on offense, 8th on defense. And they do still project for the 5 seed, 46 and 36. And again, in Cleveland, their projection is 52 and 30 at the 4 seed. So Cleveland, even with some of their injury issues, probably, especially since Miami has hit some struggles, as we'll talk about in a little bit, it seems like nobody's coming to get Cleveland. Their schedule is also really easy
So
down
easy.
the end. I mean, they Cleveland has 44 wins, and Toronto is projected to get to. I mean, I think a lot of these teams will beat their projection, but Toronto, because there are just so many bad teams, or teams above them might shut it down at the end or something like that. But yeah, I mean, Cleveland is 2 wins away from Toronto's projection right now. So I think they should be able to chill, especially if they're locked into the 4. And honestly, if it looks like Detroit is getting the 1, you probably feel pretty good about being the 4 seed, don't you? If you're Cleveland's played pretty well against Detroit this year. They would love to avoid Boston, and I think they match up okay against New York. But Detroit is a team that I think Kenny Atkinson feels like they can guard, which is probably not the case for Boston or New York.
Yeah, briefly on Cleveland's schedule, because I actually looked into this. Cleveland only plays one. They only play one game the whole rest of the season against a team that is projected to be a top 5 seed in their conference, and that is they play at the Lakers on March 31st. That's it. Everything else, they play some other good teams. For example, they play the Hawks twice. They play the Heat twice. But it's a very soft schedule overall, not playing the best teams, and then they have a fair amount of games against the tankers as well. And so let's go to the Raptors though. And in terms of their fastball, it's the easiest to identify in the league because this theory of them as the ensemble. And quickly, Barrett, Ingram, Barnes, and Pirtle, that group has a plus 10.7 clean the glass net rating and 640 possessions. Their offense is a just ridiculous 125.8 offensive rating when you consider my skepticism of that overall talent. That's really impressive. And their defensive rating is a bit better than league average too, 115.1. That group is shooting 38.4% on threes and a really strong 71.2% at the rim. The wildest number in those splits is that again, these are small samples but the Raptors shoot more long twos than some. 62.5% on long twos. That's field goal percentage on long twos. And
Well,
I
it's also
looked at,
field goal percentage
that's true because it's 2 point
because
shots.
it's a long two. It is not a three. That is that is exactly right.
And I did a little bit of tooling around because the Raptors fastball is so clearly that specific 5-man unit. I'm like, well, who is the most replaceable and statistically in that group? And it's actually Pirtle, because the Raptors have been positive with Colin Murray-Boyles still dealing with the thumb issue, and with Mamukashvili as the fifth guy. So both of those have done well. It's the other guys that, and there's a small sample one with Jacoby Walter, we're just going to talk about in a couple minutes. And so there are some potential bites at the apple for Darko Rajakovic. And the thing that I was most interested in, and this is going to be the main topic for the Raptors. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to focus on the main topic?
No, yeah, let's hit the main topic here, because there's been this discussion with RJ Barrett. He's supposedly overpaid. He's the shooting guard in this lineup because he is a natural shooting guard. But he is, not a great shooter and kind of seems overpaid, somewhat duplicative of Ingram and Scotty Barnes in their offensive game, in his offensive game, and they drafted all these other shooting guards. He's going in the last year of his deal. He's kind of a salary match throw-in in the deal to get quickly for Anunoby. But it's not like any of these guys have really stepped up, and I think they still require his transition play and rim pressure too. And they haven't really, like, their worst point of the season was when he had this weird knee injury and missed a month where he was supposed to miss like half a day. And so, like, he is important to what they're doing, and he is the perfect Raptors player for a team that's like really hoping in a good year to be a top 6 team, but doesn't have true championship aspirations.
This front office, originally Masai Ujiri, but this is still largely the case under Bobby Webster, made 3 real low end but real bites at the apple for a shooting guard that is not RJ Barrett.
I wouldn't say low end. I mean, Gray Dick was a lottery pick.
Lottery pick.
Like for especially a shooting
for this
guard.
time.
If you're gonna take a shooting guard in the lottery, like, that guy probably needs to be a starter. Like, because that's a very easily replaceable position, as we've talked about.
The first of those 3, and just because it's the simplest to discuss, is Ochai Agbaji. Ochai Agbaji's already gone. The deal, for those who have forgotten, is that it was Agbaji and Kelly Olynyk. I think of Olynyk as the main piece in that trade, going for the 2024 first round pick that became Isaiah Collier. That does not look good for the Raptors with Agbaji already gone, Olynyk already gone. There was a lot of bad
Olynyk
stuff.
was matching salary for Brandon Ingram, but when that's the best thing, the extension for Olynyk was
Oof.
a little ludicrous as well there.
Yeah. And then so he's one. Then Grady Dick, as you mentioned, was a lottery pick, the number 13 pick in 2023. He's only playing 15 minutes a game this year, which is about half of what he did last year, and on the outskirts for a good reason. And the reason is that this year, Grady Dick has not been the shooter he needs to be. Last year, 35%, which is still not what you want for this player type, on 7.5 threes per 36. And this year, 30% on 6.4 per 36. And so the per 36, that balances out the playing time. So he's taking fewer threes, making far less of them. There is some good news with Grady Dick in that, and this happens a lot for these younger players, that he's improved a lot on twos, up to 54%. For these perimeter players, I use 50% as a rough guideline for this. You need to take into account usage and free throw attempt drawing and all this other stuff. And using our stat for contested finishing, last year, Grady Dick only 40.7%, which is horrendous. This year, that's up to 55.7%, which, yeah, you can roll with that. So the idea that I had with Dick is that if you could take this improvement from 2, which when I watch the Raptors, I think that's mostly real, he gets stronger, just all this kind of stuff. It's at least a version of real. And you get his 3-point shooting back to where it was, well, then that's a more effective player. But the problem is, even that 35%, you want that for a player like this to be even higher. And so now you're building out the sample that's probably a very real concern. He's never had any season over 36.5% from three.
He's not going to be a Raptor next year, in my opinion. Makes $7 million. They are basically right at the tax for next year. They got a bunch of guys that they're going to need to extend in the future. Like, he's not going to play at all in the playoffs. He gets attacked defensively. I wouldn't want to give up on him. I liked him a lot as a prospect. These types of shooters can take a while to come along and really find their stride. And it might not be till his late 20s that he becomes the type of shooter that we hope he is. He still has, he's kind of a little bit weird form. He's trying to speed up his release a little bit. That might be why he's not hitting as many as he used to, but they just can't afford $7 million on a guy who's not going to play next year. Like, Jacoby Walter is better than him. And like, they're even playing Jamison Battle over him at this point. But Battle is kind of, I don't know exactly what he is defensively, but he is kind of a shooting guard offensively. And they still have RJ, of course. They've got a bunch of new stuff coming online in terms of contracts with guys getting raises in the summer of 27, starting with Jakob Pertl's ridiculous extension, of course. So I think they're just going to dump him. And maybe there'll be a team that I would say it'd be ridiculous for a team to just take him and see what they have next year. There's just going to be a lot of teams with mid-level trades. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like Sandro Mamukelashvili has a player option for next year. Like, they might want to dip into an exception to re-sign him, and moving on from Dick could give them the room below the tax to do that. So I would be really surprised if he ends up on this team next year.
It's a completely fair point. And when you consider if the front office thinks that Jacoby Walter is just ahead of him and RJ Barrett is the starter at that position, then throwing that.
Or if you even just wanted to sign a guy using part of your mid-level who's a shooting guard, a backup shooting guard, or you maybe just, again, you're going to make Jacoby Walter that. But if you have just $5 million to spend on a backup shooting guard, you can get someone better than Grady Dick. It's a really deep position. He's just not really like a top 60 player at that position, unfortunately, right now.
And you could theoretically also, by moving Dick, use that resource for a better player in a different role, depending on who is available and who's interested in coming for your money. But that gets us to Jacoby Walter. And for those who remember, I actually did a preliminary scout on 25 players last year, and I had Jacoby Walter 10th. And what intrigued me about Walter was that I liked his defense more than some of the other guys of this type, and that he had horrendous efficiency problems at Baylor. And the film on him offensively at Baylor was pretty terrible. But a lot of what the problem with Walter was that he was taking way too many bad shots rather than that he was missing the ones that should have been his diet. And my theory with Walter was that it would be an easier problem to clean up in the NBA, because if Jacoby Walter took the shots he did at Baylor, he just would be benched. His path to survival in the NBA was to do the thing that he had to do in the first place. And that change is pretty much done in his second season. Walter's playing about 20 minutes a game, has 11 starts, which were in that aforementioned RJ Barrett time, 59 games played. And he has halved the number of three-pointers per 36 minutes. It's a Lou Dort-esque decline and he wasn't playing as serious minutes last year as he is this year, from 6.82s per 36 to 3.4. That's an important change for him. Walter making 37% of his threes on 6.4 for 36. Yes, that is a better percentage than Grady Dick has ever shot in his career. And so that means that even though Jacoby Walter just 14% usage, 59% true shooting, has had a big improvement in terms of the contested finishing from 41% to 52%. That's worse than Dick this year, but that's still a real improvement. And this is Jacoby Walter's age 21 season. And when you look at Jacoby Walter's the play types, it's what you'd expect from the standard low usage guy, mostly spot ups. And he's much better, as you would think, with his shooter. And I brought up the limitations of him as a 2-point player before, that he's much better on spot up shots than spot up drives. And then that leads to the core question. So he's lower usage guy, can hit the open shots that are provided, and maybe eventually becomes a better two dribbles and a good decision guy than he is right now. But the core question for Darko Rakovic, and honestly more for Webster, is Jacoby Walter's defense good enough to justify big minutes as a low usage shooting guard? And I thought that the film, watching it because I wanted to watch defensive film on Walter that's more interesting than the offensive film, was fine for this player type, but not gotta start this guy film. And there were a couple of plays where it started out right. Like there was one where he was sticking with Isaiah Joe at first, and then Walter sagged too far off of Joe, great shooter for without a good reason, and then recovered too zealously and fouled Isaiah Joe on a three. So that was frustrating. There was another play where he got caught, switched onto Anthony Edwards, and then got caught on a bare screen. That's a lot to ask. My single favorite play in all of the film that I watched of Jacoby Walter's defense was one where he navigated two separate screens that Mitchell Robinson set for Jalen Brunson, and then someone else, I believe was Jameson Battle, fouled on a dig. So Jacoby Walter did everything right and made it hard, and then somebody else on his team screwed up. And a couple good plays on Andrew Nemhard. But so the film here, the idea behind Jacoby Walter would be, in an ideal world, it's in a modern world that I really like, which is guy who plays off ball offensively, but then plays on ball defensively. And that's how you can justify a two in this sort of ecosystem, is somebody who can take on those tough assignments. And Walter, he has the early film to do some of that stuff. But there are two problems. One is that he's good at it, not great. And then the other one is that the other role you'd ideally like this two guard to do is to be able to play up. And pretty much anytime I saw him facing somebody who was bigger, there was just got absolutely trucked by Pascal Siakam, for example.
Yeah, he's got to get stronger to really or he's got to become like a real threat as a movement shooter, right? He does have this, which you've been talking about for a long time with him, this ability to shoot mid rangers, and is that really a good idea? Like he doesn't have the explosion to really get a great look on those plays, and or to get much separation, because he's also doesn't have the threat of going to the basket. So I don't really like him creating much. So he's got to either become a movement shooter, or he's got to get strong enough to switch onto some threes and defend them okay. So yeah, he's kind of really a 1-2 defender at this point, it seems.
Agreed. And so there is a potential place for him. And with Walter, he has 2 more years under team control. This is his second year. So you have next year, and then the year after, I would pick up the team option on him for 27, 28. And then at that point, you see where things are. And also, by virtue of being a later pick, his salary, you brought up that $7 million for Grady Dick. Even in his 4th year, Jacoby Walter is under $6 million. So that'll be more palatable. And the Raptors will be at a different point then, because RJ Barrett's contract will have expired. We'll see where everything else is. But they have enough latitude.
They'll figure out some way to be within $3 of the tax.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, remember we were like, oh, they might have cap space. And like, no, actually, they traded for Kelly Olynyk and they extended him, so they're not going to do that now. All right, anything else on him, or should we move on?
I think we want just one other quick thing. The Raptors losing by 22 at Phoenix today. That's not exactly encouraging.
Oh yeah, I neglected to include that in they're turning it around introduction.
But where would you like to go next?
Yeah, let's talk about Philly.
The Sixers are 39-32, still 5-3 in their last 8 when you consider who has been out. That is not terrible. Below water net rating, negative 0.9 is 19th, 16th on offense, 17th on defense. And I'm skeptical of this BPI still projects them to finish with 44 wins, which would be the 8th seed out in the East, though it is thoroughly in this melange of everyone else.
Well, what's the remaining? I mean, they're 39 now, so they're going to go 500 the rest of the way? That would be under 500, right?
They're
44 and 38, so yeah, they'd go 5 and 6 the rest of the way.
Their remaining schedule, it's 11th hardest overall, 53%. So they're more in the realm of everybody else, but they only have 2 more games against the true tanking teams. The one game against the Pacers, 1 game against the Wiz, and then they have the mystery teams. They play the Bulls once and the Bucks once, and so how hard those teams are trying, and the Bucks can lose some games even when they are trying. So Philly, they don't have as many soft games. They have more games against the teams that are trying, and maybe The other unfortunate thing for the Sixers schedule wise is that the good teams they play early, so they play the Thunder on Monday, they play the Pistons, maybe Cade, well, Cade probably won't be back, but they play the Pistons and the Hornet and sorry, the Pistons and the Spurs before the last week of the season. So those teams might not have their seats set by that point.
Yeah, but that's a reasonable point. And Joel, he in theory was starting to up his activity last year, but he still has been ruled out against the Thunder with that oblique issue. Tyrese Maxey, of course, is still out. Paul George is going to be coming back relatively soon, isn't he? He should be fresh and ready to go. So I mean, Philly is definitely righted the ship. I mean, they're in 7th place now in the East. Orlando has had some struggles, losing 4 straight, and Miami has also lost 4 straight. Meanwhile, Philly has won 2 straight against the Purple Suck, that is the bottom of the Western Conference, the Sacramento Kings and the Utah Jazz. And VJ Edgecombe has gone off in those last 2 games, essentially playing point guard for them. He Quentin Grimes have been the main guys running the offense. And I thought it was 2 very different games from VJ Edgecombe. He had over 30 and 10 in that Sacramento game where they blew out Sacramento. And in that game, where he was really the most effective was in the half court. And he was doing something that I saw from him really for the first time in Summer League. And that's really been a plus for him all season, which is getting to his spot in the mid range and rising up. And he's not doing it in the way that you might see, someone who is a little bit better of a ball handler, where he's putting guys in the mix, breaking their ankles, getting separation that way. It's usually just either getting a screen and getting downhill, or just basically dribbling from the wing, usually going left in a straight line, which, most guys, unless you're trying to force a guy to the baseline, which I would actually consider doing if I were defending him in an isolation, because if he gets to his spot, especially against a smaller player, or basically anyone on the Sacramento Kings, he can just rise up on a dime. He's got a high release and he just gets way off the ground, particularly if he can get a running start and then just put his foot in the ground and rise up. And so he's been making that shot at a much better rate than you would have expected based on his college run. So he's 6 of 7 on those shots. All of that was in the half court offense, actually, which was pretty impressive. And of course, Sacramento and Utah are terrible transition defense teams. So that was the big takeaway in the Sacramento game, was just how good he looked getting to that pull up, which against bad defenders is going to work pretty well. And especially he's bringing the ball up, like having him play point guard against any, even, a Diet Coke of NBA team like Sacramento and Utah, that's still relatively impressive, I would say.
Sure.
In the Utah game, it was basically all transition, and Utah is a terrible transition defense. They have no rim protection. Most of the plays that were really impressive was him getting to the basket in transition. He had 5 buckets at the rim in transition, most of them just coming off either a make or a quick miss, or again, he's a good rebounder. He can grab and go a lot, but just coming downhill at a guard, and just nobody really was there to stop him. And he just stepped around the guard and just went right over him. Had one really impressive play coming off a handoff where Kyle Filipowski, as the center, picked him up off the handoff and looked like he was going to time up his dribble for a steal, reach in near the free throw line, and VJ just flashed by him with a left to right spin, little floater at the basket, over the next help defender who was way too small for him. So that was impressive. But largely, anytime he got in a one-on-one situation in the half court, even late clock, he couldn't even get a shot off. Like Ace Bailey forced him into really ugly shots a couple times. Again, I like the defensive flashes from Ace. He had 5 blocks in that game. You noted it. Like, he could definitely surprise guys with that big standing reach. So VJ couldn't really get separation on him. Elijah Harkless picked his pocket twice. Elijah Harkless is actually a pretty good defender on the perimeter. He can't really do much on offense, but Philly was able to win it mostly by just running the Jazz out of the gym and turning them over. But other than transition and spot up threes, I didn't think it was a very good game for VJ. And in particular, his handle still has a long way to go. Now, maybe he can get there, and he is really explosive, and he has the ability, if he can just get any separation at all, to rise up over most defenders, or hopefully blow by them, but his handle just is not close. He doesn't have the moves to create separation one-on-one. He really needs a screen, or he just has to go in a straight line if he's given that, and then just jump over the guy at the foul line. Like, those are kind of his only reliable moves. Every once in a while, like that's been moved against Filipowski, like he'll pop something else out, but like putting together big combination moves, just having like maybe he can kind of get to, follow the path of Donovan Mitchell where he's got a bunch of combinations that he can go to, but he just like he doesn't have a reactive handle, right? Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Kyrie, like these guys have the most reactive handles where they'll do their first move, you take that, they've got another move and another move and another move until they finally create the separation. And VJ just doesn't have the ability to do that at this point in time, which again, given where he was at Baylor, very impressive to have gotten to this point. But as a lead guard against a good team, like he's not what they're going to need yet. If they are able to get their group back together, how good have they been? If they actually have Embiid and Maxey and then either PG or VJ Edgecombe.
Overall, with Embiid and Maxey on the floor, plus 7.6 net rating and about 1,700 possessions. And then if you narrow the field by adding in either Paul George or VJ, it drops to a plus 6, 1, plus 6 flat. And then the most used lineup of these splits is Tyrese Maxey, Edgecombe, Kelly Oubre, Barlow, and Embiid, and that group only 316 possessions, but that group has a plus 11.7 net rating, which is strong.
So I wanted to take a look at the 23-24 season to compare that +7 number with Maxey and Embiid, because that was the season Embiid was going for a point a minute, and then Maxey had ascended to an All NBA level at that point. So they're actually +11 with those two guys on the floor back then. That was
interesting.
D'Anthony Melton, Nick Batum, Tobias Harris, along with Joel. I mean, and you would think, and Joel is obviously not close to the same player. Maxey's maybe a little bit better, but if they could get BJ and PG out there with that group, like that's probably a more talented group than the other three guys should be more talented. But remains to be seen whether we're actually going to see their full team. But Orlando and Miami have done them a big favor where they might actually not. I mean, we thought they were going to be the 10 seed. Charlotte is coming on too. It's going to be a huge race now with the Orlando and Miami. Where are we going next for your teams here?
You just brought up Tobias Harris. Let's go to his current team, the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah, Detroit, they completely destroyed Golden State in a game that Golden State actually, they maneuvered their guys to try and win that game, and they did not, in fact, win it. Draymond Green always tries to win in Detroit. That was not certainly something that he was able to accomplish in that game. So the Pistons now have won 51 games, first 50-win season since 2008 for Detroit, and all of a sudden, despite the absence of Cade, they are 6-1 in their last 7 games. Easier schedule, of course, but they are second in the NBA in net rating, plus 8.5, 10th on offense, second on defense. That defense isn't going anywhere with Cade out, and they project for the 1 seed 59-23. And in fact, that is now 5 games ahead of the Boston Celtics. So they're going to be able to throttle it down here in terms of the 1 seed, unless they're really concerned about beating San Antonio or Oklahoma City. Like they're just going to get it. This loss to Minnesota was probably the death knell for Boston's chances. That especially with Cade out, Detroit going 6-1 in their last 7, while Boston went 4-3. That probably really put a bow on the number 1 seed. And I'd be very interested to see if there are any shenanigans. The Cleveland Cavaliers have engaged in some shenanigans before, Danny, as you may recall. They wanted the Orlando Magic back in 2004. Remember, we were critical of them for, rather than trying to win and get a higher seed and maybe actually get to the conference finals, JB Bickerstaff, and I don't think Bickerstaff necessarily made the call, but it seemed like everyone was going to get fired if they got lost in the first round. And so they kind of engineered it to give themselves the ostensibly easiest matchup in the first round, and still almost lost that in 7. They had to come back from 20 points down. So we could absolutely, I think, see the Cleveland Cavaliers try to set it up as the 4 seed. I don't think they really, I mean, maybe they want to avoid Orlando, but I don't think they really care that much who they're going to get 5 through 8. So yeah, like
Right.
I'm sure they would rather play Detroit. I'm going to go ahead and predict right now it's going to be uh Cleveland in the 4 seed, Detroit in the 1 seed. But in any event, they will be making the playoffs. They've in fact clinched that. If they can get Cade back, what does their best lineup look like here?
The Pistons are a little bit different because their second best player is Jalen Duren, but you could argue that to Duncan Robinson, Tobias Harris, because there aren't suitable replacements. I wanted to look at some of those splits. So when you do Cade, Duncan Robinson, Tobias Harris, and any fourth and fifth, plus 11 net rating in about 1,700 possessions, that is very good. And if you add Duren to that, then that goes to a plus 13 and 1,348 possessions. They're 123.4 offensive rating, and with those four on the floor is phenomenal. And then they have a 110.5 defense. And in those overall splits, the ones that had any fourth and fifth, those lineups never turn it over. And they're the 3-pointer, it's a paralleling something I talked about a lot earlier in the year with the Houston Rockets. They're shooting 39% on threes, but the Pistons in those lineups are only taking 28% of their shots from long range, which is first percentile in 3-point attempt rate. Elite on the defensive glass and terrible at fouling opponents. And what I wanted to focus on was you brought up before the how position rankings can change 50 and 60s for us. I also wanted to talk about it in terms of top 10 players because one of the biggest disagreement in that podcast was you and I on one side and John Hollinger, whose opinion I respect immensely, on the other side when it came to Cade Cunningham. And John brought up the point that part of the Pistons' sterling offensive rating when Cade Cunningham is on the floor is that they offensive rebound incredibly well. And there is some truth to that. The Pistons 34.4% offensive rebound rate, that's 89th percentile, and they're even better in terms of points off misses, which factors in not only your offensive rebound rate, but then your efficiency in that. And the Pistons, that's fueled more by frequency than points per possession, but they still do well. That said, Pistons score exactly 1 point per half court play with Cade Cunningham on the floor. That's well above average. And that is way, way better than the 91.5 when he sits. Part of that is surrounding talent. Part of that is, depending on who's out there, lack of suitability replacement. I like Dennis Jenkins, but overall, that's not great. That 1 point per half court play, though, that is meaningfully worse than the Lakers, because these were the two guys in that range that we were talking about. The Lakers, instead of a 100 offensive rating, they have a 105.7 with Luka on the floor. And then the Bucks actually 108.6 half court offensive rating with Giannis on the floor, which was really impressive. I didn't know it was that strong. So Hollinger's criticism, I think that is fair in of itself. But the other part of the equation, which we brought up in the pod, was that the Pistons are a markedly better transition team with Cade than the Lakers are with Luka. And a lot of that is their fantastic transition frequency, 18.1% of overall possessions. And they have a much better frequency off of live rebounds, which is the more discretionary part of what a transition engine like Cade Cunningham can bring. The Pistons with Cade run about 3% more of live rebounds, of total live rebounds than the Lakers do with Luka. And so that's a pretty significant difference. And that brings us to the core of what we were originally discussing in that pod, which is Luka better enough on offense to make up for what all three of us acknowledge is a clear and massive difference on defense? And I just wanted to look at the all-in-one metrics to bring it out there because we had this discussion in real time then, is that EPM, they're pro Luka on this respect. Overall in EPM, Luka plus 6.6, Cade plus 4.7. That's a pretty significant difference. And BPM sees it as a lot closer. Plus 4.6 for Luka, plus 3.7 for Cade. And to me, BPM is a little bit closer. And then I actually see the defensive margin as between the two as larger than either of the all-in-one metrics does. And then the other part that is to consider. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want to bring the last?
Well, I think I just we're having this discussion at a time when Luka is kind of at his apex and Cade is injured at the moment, and Cade may not even make All NBA just because he has a collapsed lung and isn't going to be able to play any more games. But and I think people who are like, "Oh, Luka clearly top 3 MVP," it's like nah, Nikola Jokic did have maybe the best offensive season that anyone has ever had for the first 3 months of the year. And so yeah, let's calm down a little bit on some of this stuff. As Nikola Jokic had any worse talent around him than Luka this year, and they are now, the Lakers are ahead of the Nuggets, but other than clutch performance, right? I think Jokic will probably bounce back. The Nuggets have been a better team than the Lakers this year, so I'm a little wary of people who are like, oh yeah, after these last 2 weeks that Luka's had, the Lakers have won 9 straight. Like, he's clearly a top 3 MVP candidate. Maybe he should even be above Victor. And Jokic's like, no, it's he's got to do more of this. Let's see, maybe if he keeps this up the entire rest of the year. Also, Lakers have been playing some good teams, but it is easier to win at this time of year. Let's keep that in mind. So let's just wait until the end of the year to be like, oh, he's had but at this point in time, to say, "Oh, he was not my top 5 MVP," and then 2 weeks went by and he is, that doesn't work. Now, if you had been your MVP all year, I get that too, but I also think you're wrong about that. So, in any event, yeah, I would still have Cade ahead of Luka in MVP right now, but of course, Luka's going to play the rest of the year. It seems like Cade is not going to. And then I guess the other thing we could say too is, like, Cade's not a great finisher, and Luka is a really good finisher, but he shoots a lot of shots at the rim. The Pistons shoot a ton of shots at the rim, a lot more actually when Cade's on the floor. Part of that is transition, but then also if you miss a shot at the rim, that's a lot easier to offensive rebound. So Cade does get some credit, and it's also a lot easier to offensive rebound and miss layup in transition too, because there's no boxing out or anything. So I do give Cade some credit for the fact that they're able to offensive rebound as well as they are. And as you mentioned, they have the number 2 defense, and he's a big part of that. Anything else you want to say on that, or shall we move on?
I think that's about all we need to say.
Well, the Indiana Pacers are 15 and
Oh boy.
56. They not won in some time. Let me just get it in front of me here. Yes, the Indiana Pacers have lost 16 straight. Maybe we should actually do one more team after them, the Wizards, just because they've also won 16 straight, just for symmetry. The Pacers and Wiz, pretty epic tank off right now. Pacers 15 wins, Wiz 16 wins, and the Pacers doesn't actually matter that much for them, to as long as they're in the bottom 3, which they're pretty much assured of at this point. And or and definitely the bottom 4, because they have to be selected in the lottery as one of the top 4 to keep their pick. So it basically, really, the team that's rooting for them to have the worst record in the league is really more the Clippers,
Right.
because if it goes to the Clippers, then it will be 5 as opposed to 6 if it's 2, or 7 if they finish 3 with the 3rd seed in the lottery. But yeah, I hadn't realized that the Pacers have lost 16 straight. I mean, that is, they will not be able to set the all-time consecutive loss record before the end of the season. It's pretty incredible, this run that they're on lately. And I mean, that we have 2 teams on 16 game losing streaks right now. And that's just absolutely deranged. That can't have ever happened before. Maybe that'll be a good one for Dan. So let's turn now to the epic 5-game sample that we saw from Ivica Zubac. He is a broken rib, sounds like a real injury. The Pacers are at 27th in net rating, negative 9.6, 29th on offense, 25th on defense, and they project for the 15th seed. BPI thinks they're going to win 3 more games. I
Good luck.
think so. Wait, hold on. Can you tell us their schedule? Are there any games they might actually win the rest of the way? There's got to be, right? Maybe you can look that up while I'm talking about Zubac.
I already have it up. Okay. So they play at Chicago on April 1st, maybe. They play at
maybe. They might not even show up.
They might not even show up.
There's a possibility they could just.
The game where they might not show up is Thursday, April 9th at Brooklyn. Just don't field a team lose the game.
Brooklyn 17 wins, by the way. They're looking pretty good for the 3 seed in the lottery.
And then maybe the last 2 games they played, the home games against the Sixers and the Pistons, who could potentially have things locked up in different versions for them. So we'll see on those respects. Like the
Holy
Pistons,
shit, did the New Orleans Pelicans pass these teams quick, by the way. that was they're 8th now. They were
well,
like second most of
well,
the year. The Pelicans have 25 wins.
Nate, it's not a West 15 and 60, but the other team that did that is the Kings, who after they're not going to do, but the Kings could almost go 500 in March, and so they're now up to the 4th worst record in the league, and they might jump the Jazz for 5th worst when they have their own pick, which is incredible.
The Jazz are somehow 3-7 in their last 10, and they destroyed the Milwaukee Bucks the other day. All right, sorry. Let's get back to the Pacers. So Zubac, what did we see from him? Unsurprisingly, he protects the rim on defense. 46% shooting allowed in those 5 games, contested 35% of opponent rim shots. Offensively, there just wasn't really a ton to see. Pascal Siakam played, I don't know how many of those games he played. He might have played 0. He has this knee sprain. It's a crack rib for Zubac, so who knows how much of the whether they're I would imagine that's kind of a real injury. Of course, he had this quote unquote ankle injury, which was ridiculous because he was playing for the Clippers before the trade. He only had 50% true shooting, weirdly, and his usage was not that much higher than in years past. He's basically been around 19, so 22 versus 19. That's not a huge number. The big issue was he shot 47% around the rim, and his assisted 2-point percentage of buckets that were assisted was about the same. So didn't get as many dunks. I think the issue was just he was going into the post a lot more, and then he was able to get in position some near the rim, but just wasn't able to make it. Many of those took place against the Blazers. They posted him up a billion times in the first half against Portland, and he really couldn't do much, particularly against Donovan Clingan. Donovan Clingan really was bothering him. He had to go to a lot of like difficult lefty flip hooks, and you really should only go for a left-handed hook unless your name's Jaren Jackson if you're within 3 or 4 feet of the basket, I would say. So Clingan blocked it, one of his hook shots. Rob Williams also caused him some problems. And he smoked a couple of layups that were pretty easy ones. You'll see him do that every once in a while. The big thing, so the straight post ups weren't there. He was 7-20 on those in his 5 games. He was more effective as a roll man against Portland, hitting some short little floaters, and he was 9-13 overall as a roll man. And they don't exactly have a ton of point guard these days. TJ McConnell did a nice job of setting him up, rolling to the basket in the second half against Portland. The one thing that we didn't see many of that I think we'll see a lot more of when Tyrese Haliburton is healthy is quick duck-ins, and I think we'll also see him playing some high-low with Siakam as well. Either of those guys, but probably him more. Like they tried having to do some handoff stuff. That was okay. He's never been great at that, but he's so big that anytime he gets someone on him that's not a center, he should just put his ass right at the charge circle. And the Pacers are great at throwing that pass. They haven't had a guy who's a load like him to carve out space on there either. But only 2 of his 21 post-ups were plays where he actually caught the ball in good position to just go right up with it with a deep seal or something like that. So we didn't really get to see how he was going to be used. It was just kind of, well, we have no one else will throw in the ball. Let's just kind of placate him and let him have some fun. And then he broke his rib. So he's not having fun anymore. Let's finish up with the Wiz.
Yeah. The Washington Wizards have lost their last 16. They're 16-55 on the season. They're dead last in net rating, negative 12.1 per 100 possessions, 28th on offense, dead last on defense, and projected to finish with a better record than the Pacers, 19-63. And even though we don't formally know that Kyshawn George is out for the year, he had a partial tear of the UCL in his left elbow on March 2nd, and they said he'd be out for at least 3 weeks, but we're guessing that's going to be the rest of the year.
He'll be reevaluated at the start of next season.
Exactly. And so I wanted to do a little bit. I've been high on Kyshawn George for a while now of what I like about him, going through some of the film. And just briefly, his physical measurements: 6'7", barefoot with a 6'10 wingspan, 8'9" standing reach. Similar, a little bit longer than Cam Johnson, pretty similar there, and a little heavier than Dyson Daniels, which is also a reminder of how big Dyson Daniels is. And overall in the season, Kyshawn George, 15 points, 4.5 assists, 5 rebounds, played 29 minutes a game, started every game he played in, which was 48 so far for the Wiz. And a big development for George is that he last year, so at Miami, the 1 year he played, shot 41% on 7.5 threes per 40 minutes. Then that went down to 32% last year, and then went up this year back to where we thought of 38% on 6.5 threes. And when I watched the film, I thought that Kyshawn George, he has a lot of the materials to believe in being this lower usage, high efficiency wing already. Like, he only has had 6 listed pick and pop 3 attempts all season, but the footwork on that when he needs to do it, but just his normal catch and shoots look really good. And the numbers on that bear it out: 42% on 154 catch and shoot threes this year. And he actually already has a version of a trail 3, understands where to go. And so if he can't get all the way down in a possession, Kyshawn George understands, hey, I can be at this spot, I can take the shot, and it can
And he takes
good.
them from pretty deep too at times.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'll take a few from near the hash mark.
So that part of it, I believe in it. Yes, he shot worse on threes last year, but the college stuff and just watching Kyshawn George's catch and shoot shot, I believe in that. But what
Yeah,
I
I mean, I
really
think you should, right? Like he is adding 1.8 percentage points with his 3-point shot making. Like we expect him to shoot 36% based on that quality, given where it is in the clock, where it is on the floor, whether it's contested or not. He's shot 38.1%. And especially if you look at, you take out some of the off the dribble threes that we don't really think he should be taking. The self created threes, 28.7%. Team created 42.8%. So I definitely am a believer, especially because he hasn't had some great guys setting him up either. With him spotting up or on Trae Young, Anthony Davis pick and rolls, I think that should be very effective.
And so then on the offensive end, the key question is whether Kyshawn George can add to that, whether he can become more than just that low usage wing. And I think that's a mixed bag. So there are parts of it that can absolutely be cleaned up, where he has a couple of nice plays where George stays in control and had a nice bounce pass in a pick and roll to the big, and had a pass to CJ on the strong side back when CJ McCollum was on this team, when somebody kind of did a dig on the same side. And so that stuff is there for the 2 dribbles and a good decision, which is the main ramp up for the low usage guy. I think that stuff is pretty well in hand, and then can get better ideally as a contested finisher. 46% last year, 50% this year. I could see that as he gets stronger. That could move up. There was one where he did a drive and a step through on Naz Reid. I like that in the film. And Kyshawn George already runs the floor hard. Embracing this role can do that. If the question is, can he become a true on-ball guy? I don't think so. The isolation film is pretty bad. One of the plays that was a problem there got Bobby Portis in an ISO, drove into a weak mid-ranger that missed, and probably just not that guy. I'm totally fine with that for a player like Kyshawn George, not being that. Is some of the on-ball stuff, but what can be a factor later on is the threat of him as a shooter leading to easier drives, and then as I said, the 2 dribbles and a good decision. So I think that stuff is really potentially there. Then the question is, can he actually be good enough defensively to be a low usage defense first wing? And I think that the answer is yes, and potentially in a surprising way. And there are 2 main niches that a defense first wing can be. One is the wing stopper niche, which you could bring up various different guys over the years. Is the set and forget it, ideally somebody who could defend the Kawhi Leonards, the LeBron Jameses of the world. Unless Kyshawn George gets a lot stronger, that's going to be hard, but maybe he can hold his own against enough of those guys and do decent. There was a play where he stayed strong on Julius Randle and got him stripping on the way up. And there's actually more, and I don't make this comparison lightly. You see on some of the steals and blocks for Kyshawn George a little bit of Andre Iguodala in that he's going for stuff that other guys just don't try and is more successful on it than a lot of players are. And for somebody as young as Kyshawn George, as a reminder, he was a one and done. So this is age 22 season, older one and done, but still on the young side. That there's some early stuff here that's pretty interesting. But instead, what I liked more, even though some of the wing stuff looked okay, was the idea that he could actually fill some of the help defender power forward stuff instead and be
And he
a
basically has been the power forward all year, which is he's overmatched there from a strength standpoint. But in terms of being able to make plays, like I actually think it's not insane. Contesting 22% of opponent shots at the
Mhm.
rim and averaging over a steal and a block and allowing 63% true shooting, like that's actually not bad. It's just they're never going to get a defensive rebound if he's the four, and they're not going to guard anyone in the post. So it is interesting to think about him as the starting three next to Sar and Anthony Davis. And then, maybe Sar or Davis will be the guy who could guard opposing fours. And then, so does he need to then be like the on ball, like getting over screen guy? Like did you see anything there? I mean, wasn't deployed in that role as much this season.
I didn't see much in the film there because that wasn't what he was really asked to do. And but potentially, and one of my favorite plays that he had, which is another different niche, is that Keyshawn George did a dig off of Steph Castle to strip Wembanyama, which you want to see just because anybody avoiding Steph Castle when he is not involved in the action is a good decision. And jumping plays where he's not in the action. There was a lazy pass from Jalen Brunson when Brunson got pressured and George just read the pass and got a pick six. So maybe, and George actually, it's long past with Zaire Williams. This idea of a way longer guy in that role, he'd have to move his feet well. But I would love to see, hopefully, a different coach for the Wizards at least experiment with Keyshawn George in that role because it would be a great value add. And we know that Trae Young can't do it. So if you, sure, give it a shot. That's another way he could be useful.
Yeah, and I imagine they're going to try to get a more experienced wing. They've got Jameer Watkins, who could maybe be interesting as a bench piece guarding as well, but probably not a good enough shooter. He's probably going to have to be a backup three for these guys potentially. And you imagine they're still going to want to start Trey Jones? Yeah, maybe they'll just start Darren Peterson. Yeah, so much obviously depends on what happens for them in the draft. You also don't love the Trey Young acquisition when a couple of the guys they might take would be point guards. So but I think you probably as of right now it would be Trey Johnson at the two and Trey at the one, and Keyshawn George will have to be that get over screens guy, but he would also, in theory, have Sar and Anthony Davis behind him. So it'll be fascinating to see what comes of him. I agree with you. He's gotta, if he's gonna truly hit though, he's gonna have to be that guy who can guard point guards pretty well. And he's not. It's interesting because he has these defensive instincts. Like he's not at all a great athlete. He's got 9 dunks this year. So it's not. It's really more about just like having good hands and getting in a position pretty well. But I'm not sure he's going to be able to use the elite length to get over screens, bother the shooter from behind, and when you're playing a more traditional pick and roll coverage, it's maybe if they get a competent coach, it'll be fascinating to see how George gets used. Are we done here?
I think we are.
Okay. Well, we will have much more for you coming this week. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening and subscribing. And yeah, comment on YouTube, hit that bell if you want to get a notification when we go live. And of course, we do a lot more on YouTube as well, including clutch calls, which we'll be doing pretty much every night of the playoffs. I haven't been doing as many of them lately because, I've been watching more games on tape, trying to spend some time with my family before the playoffs. But that is a basically, I'll call the game, but we'll give you and it'll be me and Danny during the playoffs. But we'll give you our insight live, but you can still experience the excitement of the end of the game. So hopefully it's the best of both worlds if you missed it, to get more insightful analysis and still experience what it was like to watch it live. All right, we'll talk to y'all next time. Thanks for listening.